Chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
The Chair lays in front of the House an enrolled bill.
Senate Joint Resolution 8, Joint Resolution providing for the appointment of Stephen M. Case as a citizen regent of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution.
The Chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. Okay. Yep. This is the gentleman from Missouri. Seek recognition.
For 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about National Golf Day. Earlier today, I attended an event and heard the story of one of our wounded warriors and how the sport of golf has helped him to overcome his traumatic brain injury and learn the sport of golf even with prostheses and how much that's helped him. The first small business I owned happened to be a miniature golf course. I also went to high school with the late, great Payne Stewart, and no, none of his golf abilities rubbed off on me, unfortunately. Golf is a $76 billion industry which provides 2 million jobs in the United States. Golf courses are generally small business owners own golf courses, and I know the challenges that small businesses face today. The estimated economic impact of the golf industry is over $200 billion. Golf course superintendents are excellent environmental stewards of the land and among the best in the world at knowing how to care for the earth. Being outdoors always improves one's quality of life. Walking just a 9-hole course can give you a 2.5-mile workout, or in my case, 7 miles. It is a sport that can be played by all ages, and we should take time today to recognize National Golf Day. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What started out as a small pirated radio show of 2 men running from the law under a bridge into a successful empire today, the Rowan Roper Show has entertained many people for a long time, and today it's reached its whole 1-year anniversary. While many radio shows struggle to increase listenership, the majority of drive-time listening Illinoisans tune into Rowan Roper from 2 to 6 every weekday. In addition to providing cutting-edge news, and listeners tune in to hear entertaining and informative exchanges between Rowan Roper and their callers. But both come with a very unique and admirable trait that makes the show a success. Ro Khan has a strong level of dedication to his community and was recently honored as the 2010 Chicago area recipient of the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award for unwavering support of law enforcement in general. Richard Roper is a fellow Redbird alumni of Illinois State University and has led an outstanding career as a columnist, critic, and show host covering topics ranging from politics to media and to entertainment. On WLS and Rowan Roper's 1-year anniversary, I'm honored to take this time to recognize 2 successful individuals who provide an outstanding show on a daily basis, but also 2 men who I'm proud to call friends. Congrats, gentlemen. Here's to another year, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what reason does the gentleman from Tennessee rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to celebrate the great leader, minister, and educator, Dr. Donald Jeans, who is retiring this year as president of Milligan College in my hometown of Johnson City, Tennessee. President Jeans is a 1968 magna cum laude graduate of Milligan College and has lived in Johnson City most of his life, first as a minister and then as part of Milligan College. President Jeans was inaugurated as the 14th president of Milligan College in October of 1997. Under Dr. Jeans' leadership, Milligan College has consistently been named one of America's best colleges and has experienced phenomenal growth both in terms of the physical campus as well as the courses offered. I would like to personally thank and acknowledge Dr. Jeans for his commitment to faith, education, and community development, and I wish he and his wife, Lorinda, the very best as he prepares for his retirement from the presidency of Milligan College. And I'd like to say to my friend, a job well done. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. For what reason does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 60 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 25 days since the President began kinetic military action in Libya without congressional authorization. He made this decision despite the fact that the conflict in Libya did not represent an imminent threat to the United States. Instead, the President sought the approval of the United Nations and the Arab League before taking military action, and not Congress. This sets a terrible precedent. By seeking the UN approval, the President is transferring authority that should rest with the American people through their Congress, not to an international community. The UN resolution is nice, but it is not a substitute for congressional authorization. Under the War Powers Resolution, the President needs to seek congressional approval within 60 days. I have introduced a resolution expressing the sense of Congress that President Obama must adhere to the War Powers Resolution. Whether you call it a kinetic military action or war, this Congress must authorize it. If we don't, we will be setting the precedent that we are irrelevant, and the President need only seek approval from international bodies outside of the jurisdiction of the American people. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. For what reason does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise because I had the opportunity to attend the KGC this last weekend, an event raising resources to battle depression. Depression affects over 20 million adults in our nation. This is something that we all need to be paying more attention to. I want to thank Chairman Bennett for his leadership. I also want to thank Kevin Haggart, Andrew Boyle, Phil First, and Tom Joyce for their generous contributions to the event. And I also want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Andrew Boyle for his leadership for next year's event. And with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. Further requests for 1 minute speeches. Then the chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Culberson of Texas for today after 4 p.m.
Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader. Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Today we've seen a remarkable event here on the floor of the House. During this discussion that's so critically important to this nation about the deficit and how we're going to deal with our budget, this House passed a bill that will actually increase the deficit. A bill passed today with the support of the Republicans to repeal a provision in the Affordable Health Care Act that will keep Americans healthy. Healthy Americans don't need medical care, and I suppose the idea of the Republicans here is that they ought to get sick. You take a look at the wellness issue. Part of the Affordable Care Act, it provided for numerous activities specifically designed to keep Americans healthy. Blood pressure screening for adults, programs for children to avoid obesity, public health programs for vaccinations so that our children and indeed our adults don't get sick. All of these programs in the wellness portion of the Affordable Care Act would be repealed by the action that the Republicans just voted on not more than a half hour ago. What in the world's going on here? What's this all about? Is it some sort of ideological, spiritual thing to do what is not very smart? The Affordable Health Care Act, which they like to call Obamacare, has many, many provisions in it specifically designed to reduce the cost of medical care in America. And if you're going to deal with the deficit, and we all talk about it here, you've got to deal with the cost of Medicare. How do you deal with the cost of Medicare? Well, you deal with it by reducing the likelihood that seniors will get sick. You deal with it by reducing high blood pressure in seniors so they don't get strokes. One of the most expensive things that senior population will endure is a stroke. It's not just the immediate medical care, it's the long-term effect of a stroke. And so when we go out and we try to have seniors, and those soon-to-be seniors have blood pressure checks, we reduce the cost of medical care in America. But I guess the Republicans don't see it that way. They also see it in another way, and that is somehow they believe that we can reduce the cost of medical care in the federal budget by terminating Medicare. Unbelievable that the Republican budget would terminate medical care for seniors by terminating Medicare, a program that was started in 1964 to deal with the specific problem that seniors had at that period, and that was the inability to afford medical services. They would literally be into bankruptcy and poverty because they couldn't pay for their medical care. So in 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Democrats in this House and the Senate passed Medicare, one of the foundations of support for the senior population in this nation. And yet, in the Republican budget that'll be on this floor later this week is the repeal of Medicare, the termination of it. And so I suppose this is the new way we ought to look at this issue. It's a tombstone. And what it is, it said Medicare, 1965 to 2011, created by LBJ, destroyed by the GOP. Unbelievable. Fortunately, today, when President Obama spoke to the nation, he addressed this issue. And I'll paraphrase what he said. He says it more as a professor. I guess I'll just say it as a street fighter from California. No way, no how will, in his presidency, Medicare be terminated. Are you listening, my friends on the Republican side? The President said, no, we're not going down the path of terminating Medicare. And I know that my caucus, the Democratic caucus, will stand there with the President. We will fight any attempt, any time, any place, anywhere that you or anybody else will put before this House a proposal to terminate Medicare. We will not allow it. And thankfully, the President has the veto pen. He ought to go back and pull out the pen that LBJ used to sign the Medicare law in 1965 and put it to paper should somehow the Republican budget arrive on his desk with the termination of Medicare in it. It should not happen. It cannot happen. We cannot subject our seniors to the kind of poverty that existed prior to the implementation of Medicare in the 1960s. This is something that we will stand and fight on. The President also said today, as he laid out his solution for a $4 trillion reduction in the deficit, that do not terminate Medicare and don't privatize Social Security. Laying it down, not a line in the sand, but clearly a mark on the concrete. Social Security will not be privatized during his watch. Thank you, Mr. President. And you know this, that the Democratic caucus in this House will stand firmly with you, and we will fight every bill, every proposal to privatize Social Security. Now, we know there's a budget problem. We know that there is a deficit problem here in the United States, and we know that it has to be addressed. The President has laid out 2 chapters in the Democratic proposal to deal with the deficit. In his State of the Union speech, he made it clear that federal expenditures needed to be frozen over the next 5 years. And today he took another step, recommending specific reductions in various federal programs, all to the good. And we will stand there with them, and we will work on reducing those federal expenditures. For me, I've got one in mind, about $120 billion a year that we could save. $120 billion a year. Now that's 3.5 times what is in the Republican continuing resolution that will be on the floor this week. How do you find $120 billion a year? End the war in Afghanistan. End the war in Afghanistan, bring the troops home, bring the money home, balance our budget, use that to solve the deficit, or spend that money on building those roads, those facilities here in the United States. But let's talk about the deficit for a moment. Oh, yes. If you're going to talk about the debt, you really ought to understand where the deficit came from. This year didn't just appear during the Obama administration. The deficit is something that is built up over a long period of time here in the United States. And when they say the deficit is $14 trillion and is going to increase, well, it's not. If the President and the Democrats get their way, it will actually be reduced by $4 trillion. However, the current deficit, where did it come from? Where did it magically appear? Well, let's take a look. Here's the facts. Who left us with huge deficits? Well, this fellow over here, you may recognize him. That's Ronald Reagan. At the end of every year, the Congressional Budget Office makes an estimate of what is going to happen over the next 10 years. At the end of the Ronald Reagan period, his last year in office, the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, made an estimate of the federal budget situation. Where's the deficit? They estimated that in the next 10 years, Ronald Reagan's budget and the programs that were put into effect during his period would create a $1.4 trillion deficit. Now, those of you that are familiar with the history of the United States would know that George W.H. Bush, the senior, followed Ronald Reagan. And at the end of his 4 years in his office, again, the Congressional Budget Office made an estimate, and they estimated that should the Bush-Reagan policies go forward, the deficit would be $3.3 trillion in the out years. Then along came Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton put in place in the first 4 years of his administration policies that would, if extended forward, deal with the deficit, such things as PAYGO, a word that's common in Washington, but I'm sure out there in the great American public, people have no idea what PAYGO is. PAYGO was the law during the Clinton administration, and it required that any bill passed by Congress had to be paid for with either higher taxes or cuts in some other program. In other words, could not create a deficit, could not add to the deficit. There were other programs put in place, part of which I was responsible for implementing, and that was reinventing government. I was at the Department of Interior during those years as the Deputy Secretary, and we were told by the Clinton administration, Office of Management and Budget, you will reduce the expenditures of the Department of Interior, and you'll continue to do the same things, only do them better. Effective and efficient government. We reduced the number of employees in the Department of Interior during those first 4.5, 5 years by some 15,000 people, from 90,000 to 75,000 people. And we performed all of the previous services as well, and in many cases better. So it's possible to be efficient and effective in this process. Well, anyway, Bill Clinton is now president, puts all of these policies in place, and at the end of his presidency, Congressional Budget Office did what it always does, an estimate of what would happen in the next 10 years if the same policies were to continue. Well, guess what would happen? What would happen is a $5.6 trillion surplus. $5.6 trillion surplus, enough to wipe out all of the American debt. No debt, no interest payments, everything paid off. However, Bill Clinton was followed by George W. Bush. And immediately, in the very first year of the Bush administration, the Clinton period policies, some of which were voted on by Republicans as well as Democrats, were terminated. Massive tax cuts put in place, not only in year one, but in year two. Two wars started, the Afghanistan War and the Iraq War, neither of which were paid for. First time in American history that wars were not paid for, but rather borrowed. Who did we borrow the money from? China. Other foreign countries? Yes. So anyway, you now had two massive tax cuts, two wars, and then the Medicare drug program, again about $700 billion a year, not paid for, but rather borrowed. Not 1 year, but every year on into the future. And thirdly, a whole set of policies where the government simply stepped back and let Wall Street do whatever it wanted to do. And what they wanted to do was reckless profiteering, resulting in 2007 and 2008 with the crash of the American economy, the Wall Street crash of 2008, bringing down the American economy to its knees, to the greatest recession since the Great Depression. Now, those policies added up to this rather massive red zone here, $11.5 trillion, $11,500 billion of deficit estimated by the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, that projected in the next 10 years, if the same policies continued, an $11.5 trillion deficit. President Obama came to office in January of 2009. The day he arrived in office, the budget that he had to put in had a $1.3 trillion hole in it. He didn't create it, but he had to deal with it. $1.3 trillion deficit handed to him by George W. Bush and his policies. That's the history. Now, we're trying to dig ourselves out of that hole. Now, properly said, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Wise policy. The President couldn't do that, and this Congress couldn't do that in the face of the most serious financial and economic crisis this nation had faced since the Great Depression. And so the stimulus bill was enacted, some $750 billion, and it worked. Despite all the rhetoric, economists looking at that today in the cool memory of the stimulus bill said it worked, it saved this economy, it saved this nation, and every other industrialized country in the world did the exact same thing. They stimulated their economy, and together the American and the international economy was stabilized. And we began slowly to grow out of that Great Recession. We're not out of it yet. And we've got to put in place policies that end the deficit. And that's precisely what the President talked about today. Now, the Republicans have put a proposal before us, and we'll vote on it this week. But it is not a proposal that will help America retain its eminence as the most dynamic, the most creative, the most innovative, and the most successful economy in the world because of the policies that are in it. It will terminate Medicare, and it will significantly reduce those programs that create future economic growth. I'd like to just take a deep breath now and turn over to my colleague from the great northeastern part of the United States. Peter, would you like to join us and carry on this discussion?
Thank you. I appreciate your historical perspective on it, and there's really two things I want to address. One is, what are the policies that were part of getting us to that $11.5 trillion deficit? And number two, what do we need to do now in order to get to fiscal balance? The two policies were, one, a war of choice, where the Pentagon, in its activities, was not subject to the same scrutiny of actually having to pay as you go. So that cost of the war in Iraq was $1 trillion. The war in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, started out as a mission to dislodge Osama bin Laden. It was transformed into nation building. And no matter how necessary or debatable either of those events were, those wars were, you do have to pay for it. It's not as though, because it's in the name of national security, it can be exempt from fiscal responsibility. In fact, what's unusual is that this is the first time in the history of our country where we have been at war, where we actually haven't asked for shared sacrifice by the taxpayers, but we've made the entire burden be borne by our military. So we've got to pay, and we didn't do it, as you pointed out. The second is a theory that's being advanced by many, that if you cut taxes, it will create wealth and create jobs. You know, in some places, and sometimes in some circumstances, that will work. In fact, many standard economists say that in a recession, it's the time to cut taxes, not raise them. But the more that is focused on the middle class, who are struggling, especially in a down economic time, to pay their bills, if they get a tax cut, they have discretionary income, or they have income liberated, that money is going to go right back into the economy. But every tax cut does not generate jobs, and many tax cuts, what they end up doing is adding significantly to the deficit. So the President Bush tax cut in 2001, the President Bush tax cut in 2003 added $2.3 trillion to the deficit. So you have a Pentagon that is not subject to pay-as-you-go. You have tax cuts that don't pay for themselves, and those are two major contributing factors to that $11.5 trillion deficit on the heels of a $5.6 trillion surplus. The debate we're having now in this House is enormously consequential to the future. The Republicans won this last election, and a major argument they made is that we've got to get spending under control. They're right. I agree with that. We have to get to fiscal balance. The challenge is, if we're going to get there, do we need a plan that repeats those two policies of the Bush administration, namely keeping the Pentagon off the table and increasing tax cuts, particularly to the high end, but keeping off the table Pentagon savings, keeping off the table eliminating tax loopholes, keeping off the table the question of revenues? Democrats, in my view, have to be willing to come forward and say, look, programs that we have been strong supporters of have to be re-examined. We have to reform them. We have to make them more efficient. If they're not working, we have to acknowledge that and move on. We have to do our share. And the President's proposal that would freeze domestic spending for 5 years is pretty dramatic. But many Democrats would be willing to support tough medicine as long as the plan had on the table other things that are major contributors to the fiscal situation we're in. And that's, of course, revenues. That's, of course, the Pentagon. And that's, of course, tax loopholes in the tax system. We can get from where we are to where we need to be. We saw that in recent years when it happened under President Clinton. And as, again, you pointed out, in those years, tax codes matter. But, you know, in the Clinton years, when we had higher tax rates, we created 20 million jobs. In the Bush years, when we had lower tax rates, we created 600,000 jobs. And also, incomes were increasing. So this has to be reviewed by this body, in my view, as a practical problem for us to solve, not an ideological argument that every tax cut is going to be beneficial, any more than every spending program is going to be beneficial. You have to apply judgment to the situation at hand. The big challenge for us is restoring fiscal balance. And I yield back. I thank the gentleman.
Let me thank my colleague from Vermont, Peter Welsh, for this presentation on the tax policy. I think we probably would want to stay with that a few moments. I know my colleague from New York, Mr. Tonko, is here, and perhaps you'd like to opine and share with us your thoughts on these issues of the budget and how we can deal with the deficit.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Garamendi, and I compliment Representative Welch for what I believe is a balanced approach to how to solve the deficit situation, the debt situation, and certainly how we move forward with a sound budget that can invest in America at a time when other nations are investing in a clean energy innovation economy. So we don't have the luxury to just hone in on deficit or on budget carving here that solely relies on impacts through domestic program cuts on our middle-class families, our working families, and the poor. What we have seen here is trillions worth of cuts to domestic programs, impacting the ability to pay utility bills, impacting the ability to perhaps send your adult child off to college, to dream the American dream, to own a home, to have an affordable home budget. All of these items are at risk here. We're putting people most vulnerable at risk. We have seen almost a flat curve for the growth in household income across America, just a slight bump upward, while we've seen an exponential rise in corporate executive salaries, in millionaire and billionaire wealth. That is where the growth has been. The recovery here has seen that happening with a downward spiral, a downward mobile quality to the comeback of our efforts here in this country. So it is important for us to make certain that there is a balance here, that we're calling upon all tools in the toolkit to make it all happen. And this chart absolutely tells a story. Over the last 40 years, middle-class wages have stagnated, while millionaires and billionaires have trumped all by 256%. Now, this tells the story. When people are talking about not wanting to visit a fairness in tax policy here, when we have seen the anger in America expressed via the many, many households, that the great multitudes of people in this country are portrayed in the middle class. They are the population that have expressed anger, and rightfully so. That anger has got to be addressed through fairness in tax policy, through an across-the-board impact of solution here that will enable us to do what's fair and do what's correct. You know, I watched the savings that they talk about here with the Republican plan. The Republicans will talk about the huge, immense savings that they produce, all through cuts on the domestic programs, again, impacting working families, the poor, and the middle class. Well, those aren't savings, because in order to be savings, they would go toward, might be in a locked box or assumed to go after relieving the deficit. But instead, they take these trillions in like amount and provide tax cuts for millionaires, billionaires, corporations, still continue to hand out mindlessly the subsidies to big oil companies. This is what's so most egregious about this budget. Instead of working toward a balance that looks at revenues, that looks at the domestic programs that require investment, no, they're going pell-mell into an all-out attack on the middle class. That is wrong. And also in the outcome, as they slide programs and assistance and investment to middle-class America, as they slide it over to the millionaire, billionaire, corporate oil, big oil company crowd, that community, what happens in the interim? We grow, with this Republican plan for a budget, we grow debt by $8 trillion. So where have we gained here? This sounds like a repeat of the pre-recession years, where we were not acknowledging fairness in revenues, where we were allowing for a falling apart of a system. At the same time, we took the watchdog out of the equation on the financial sector on Wall Street. We allowed for working families' portfolio of investments to go to ruination, where we lost $2.8 trillion in accumulated wealth on 401ks and various other investment materials. And this is what happened. We destroyed the economy, and now we're going to repeat history. History of the worst kind. Let's pick up on history of the best kind. Let's pick up on investing in jobs as we did in the FDR years, where we came out of tough economic times and people knew the dignity of work, and we saw projects built across America, not the trickle-down theory that didn't work during the Reagan administration and the trickle-down theory that didn't work during the second Bush presidency. It just didn't happen. And my question is, I can't help but rhetorically ask, why would we revisit that kind of scenario again, knowing that we're just crawling out of the recession and we're growing private sector jobs to the tune of 2 million in just over a year? Why would we disrupt that progress? I ask, why would we disrupt that? Representative Garamendi, I think this is great that we're bringing this information to the forefront here and allowing it to be exchanged with the people that we serve day in and day out, who have expressed rightfully the anger about the onus, the burden, the unnecessary pain that has been placed upon their households of modest annual income means.
The chart that you and I shared a moment ago is up here next to me, and it clearly shows that we've seen a middle class in America that has seen very, very little progress over the last 2 decades, and instead an enormous shift of wealth and income to the top 1 or 2% of the nation. 256% increase in income to the very wealthy. As it said, it trumps all of the income gains by the rest of the economy. Those at the bottom maybe saw a 10%, 11% increase, the rest very, very little. I look up and I see my colleague from the great state of Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer. Thank you for joining us. We talked earlier today about the upcoming debt limit, but please join us and share with us your thoughts on what we're doing here, or what we shouldn't be doing or should be doing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, I appreciate your leadership and your focusing on the issues that face us. Having spent hours in the Budget Committee so far this Congress, I must admit that I was shocked and surprised with the profoundly negative approach that is being taken by my good friend Paul Ryan, the chair of the Budget Committee, and my Republican friends. First of all, there is, in essence, a refusal to zero in on the 3 areas of greatest increase in the budget. We see repeated charts that talk about Medicare going through the roof over the next 50 years. And it's true. We need to get Medicare spending under control because the past path is not sustainable. But ironically, what is ignored is that the approach that is being offered by the Republicans in their budget actually ignores the major provisions that have been placed in statute now that would actually reduce the rate of Medicare spending in the future. We have taken every significant, independently verified, promising initiative to bend that cost curve, and they've been stripped away. We watched Republicans attack Democrats because there were provisions to be able to make a difference with Medicare spending, claiming that it would somehow slash Medicare for senior citizens by $500 billion. Well, Congressman Garamendi, you and I come from areas of the country that actually have been able to reduce health care costs. They're below the national average. And in both areas, we actually have higher performance. Better health care, less cost. If the rest of America practiced medicine the way it is practiced in our two communities, there would not be a Medicare crisis. Well, what we have done with the Reform Act was embed those notions to be able to provide incentives to reward value over volume, not just pay for procedures, to be able to have accountable care organizations, bundling of services, to actually have some financial disincentives for unnecessary hospital readmissions. Well, all of these, the experts tell us, could save over $1.2 trillion over the next 20 years. And in fact, if we had the courage to actually improve and accelerate and enhance, there are greater savings because the doctors, the nurses, the hospitals in our two communities have proven that it's possible. But our Republican friends have simply decided to turn their back on that. They're going to take the Medicare savings and spend it for tax cuts for people who need it the least. And I can't help but turn back to you because you have an interesting chart there on the floor that may say it all.
Well, I thank you, and let's just do a colloquy here back and forth. You've talked about ways in which we can bend the cost curve for health care for all Americans, not only those on Medicare. It was in the Affordable Health Care Act, the health care reform. Our Republicans like to call it Obamacare, and I'm happy with that because it actually would reduce the cost of medical services for everybody, whether you're in Medicare or you're in Kaiser or any other. And you mentioned four very, very important ways it does it. Hospital readmissions, otherwise known as hospital infections. Our colleague, a week ago, likely died of a hospital infection. The Affordable Care Act places a heavy burden on hospitals that have a high infection rate, where readmissions, very, very expensive, deadly situation. It's just but one of several ways in which the Affordable Care Act reduced over time the cost of medical services. You were here on the floor. You voted no. I voted no on a bill that our Republicans forced through this House that eliminates wellness. Oh, what in the world was that all about? Why would you ever eliminate wellness? Obesity, blood pressure, proper eating, nutrition, public health, vaccinations, all of these things to keep people healthy. Healthy people don't cost money. They don't run up the price of medical services. So they want to repeal that. And I'm going, that makes no sense at all. You're actually increasing the deficit by doing that. And then they take it to the ultimate step of terminating Medicare. This has become my favorite. It's the tombstone for Medicare. In the Republican budget is a proposal that would terminate Medicare for all Americans who are less than 55 years of age today. If you're 65, maybe it would continue on. But if you look at the totality of their proposal, it is the termination of Medicare, and this is what we have. Medicare, 1965 to 2011, created by LBJ, destroyed by the GOP. Unbelievable. And along with it, a significant reduction in Medicaid, which in California we call Medi-Cal. Your expertise, Mr. Blumenauer, on the health care issue and the experience in Oregon on how we can reduce the cost of medical care needs to be heard by every member of this House. So if you would continue on and share with us other thoughts about this issue of medical services and how we can deal with reducing the cost, saving Medicare, and simultaneously addressing the deficit.
Well, your point is well taken in terms of what they would do terminating Medicare as we know it for everybody under 55 years of age. We're talking about over 2 330 million Americans. And as a result of this, it's clear, you can look at the Congressional Budget Office, other independent experts, it's not going to reduce the cost of health care. In fact, it's going to increase the cost of health care in America. But what it does is it's going to put an ever-increasing burden on elderly Americans. It's going to have a gap for those, because ultimately they're not going to enable people to have Medicare until they're 67. They're going to have a small voucher that is given to the insurance company. Bear in mind the reason that LBJ in 1965 and the Democratic Congress enacted Medicare was because America's elderly could not get good insurance coverage that was comprehensive and affordable. Senior citizens, like it or not, are older, they're frailer, they are less healthy than Americans, and they're not working as much, they don't have the income, they need help. Now, our Republican friends would lead us to believe that all of a sudden there will be a private insurance market, which, by the way, sounds suspiciously like the exchanges that they said were bad in the Health Reform Act, and they would force people into it, but they would have decreasing premium support. I think it's also appropriate to just reflect for a moment about what happens to the 78 million geezer baby boomers who are 55 or older who will be under Medicare. That's going to continue for years. It's going to be increasingly inefficient. It appears as though there are some extra costs that are embedded for existing and soon-to-be future Medicare recipients that are going to continue to distort, drive up costs, and of course nationally we're all going to pay more for the privilege. I would suggest this tombstone is something that people should consider carefully, because it's going to mean, I sincerely believe, not just the death of Medicare, but it's going to provide profound shifts and dislocations within our health care system, hurt the providers, and provide less effective health care for our elderly citizens.
Let me add to that and carry on a little piece of it. The Republican budget, which we'll be voting on here on the floor of Congress in the next 2 days, has provisions that are equally harmful to seniors and to wannabe seniors, people who want to get to be 65 or 67 years of age, and this is the Medicaid reductions. In the proposal that the Republicans will bring to this floor, the Road to Ruin proposal is a block grant to the states for Medicaid services. In California, we call it Medi-Cal, and this is a program that provides benefits to the poor and those who cannot afford medical services because they are severely disabled, mentally disabled, or seniors that cannot afford services in nursing homes. The block grant is less than what is now available to nearly every state, and it is scheduled to be reduced in the years ahead, the purpose of which is presumably to deal with the deficit. But what it does is it takes that whole population of seniors, current seniors, and others who are currently served by the Medicaid program and puts them at risk. The effect will be to throw seniors out of nursing homes, seniors that are on Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California. It is the most onerous and hard-hearted proposal I have yet seen. These are people that are in desperate need of services. Services for mentally ill, services for severely disabled, services for seniors that are in nursing homes and who cannot afford the cost of nursing homes. That's another part of this provision in the budget. And so what's happening here is a shift of costs from the overall American economy in the federal budget to the individuals, not to the wealthy, not to those who have income, but rather to those who have so little. And it's not the only shift that's occurring. I'd like to, if it's okay with you, Mr. Blumenauer, where does the money come from?
Could we just follow up on this
Sure.
just for a moment, if we could, because you are talking about something that ought to concern each and every citizen. Medicaid, in your state, Medi-Cal, we've had the Oregon Health Plan. There are other states that have variations on that. It provides health care, as you say, for our most vulnerable populations, the elderly, disabled, extremely poor people.
And the young.
It is very cost effective. It actually, there are complaints that the benefits under Medicaid are actually very low, and it's hard for physicians and hospitals, medical providers to deal with this. But by moving to a block grant that, as you say, is designed to go down over time, and unlike the current system, which is sort of counter-cyclical, where the federal government has given more money in times of distress, which it's done to your state and my state in the last 2 years, if we hadn't got the extra payments from the federal government to help with Medicaid, I can't imagine what shape people would have been in Sacramento and Salem, Oregon. The legislature would have just melted down. Well, what this proposal is to continue this ratcheting down, no benefits when times are tough, and put states in a situation where too often they are either unable or, in the case of some states, unwilling to react. It's going to have a cascading effect. You mentioned the problem that's very likely to emerge with people being literally tossed out of nursing homes. This is something that Americans need to step back and look at what is being designed as part of this very pessimistic roadmap that is going to have very serious negative consequences.
I thank you for that. I'm going to shift to another very, very important part of the Republican budget proposal, and that is their total unwillingness to deal with the reality of the revenues that the federal government needs in order to continue to provide all of the multitude of services that are part of a modern society, everything from defense to Homeland Security, as well as the medical and social services that we've been talking about. I'm going to put this up. It's a little cute, but I think it pretty much illustrates one of the profound problems in the Republican budget. Let's see, what's it say? It says, what do they all have in common? Well, we've got the unicorn over there, and we have Bugs Bunny. And then we have this thing that says the corporate tax rate, 35%. Large corporations like Exxon. It's a fallacy. Large corporations and small corporations in America don't pay 35% corporate income tax. In fact, if one were to take a look at Exxon, in 2008 they had the largest profit of any company in the world. In 2009, they had a profit of about $19 billion, and their effective tax rate, that's how much they actually paid in taxes, was 0. Not 35%, not 30%, not 25, not 20, not 15, not 10, but 0. Now, it happens that they're not the only corporation. The Republican proposal actually would make this situation worse. It would take this 35% and reduce it to 25%. And go, well, what are we talking about here? Why would we want to do that? Apparently, they want to do that because they want to take their savings, Medicare by terminating Medicare, Medicaid by reducing Medicare, Medicaid, and all of the other savings, the savings that they presume they're going to get from abolishing the wellness programs, high blood pressure screening, so forth, and on and on and on, and give it to the corporations. Let's understand that the American corporations currently get a tax break for sending American jobs overseas. American corporations currently get a tax break for oil drilling. The oil industry in the United States is the most profitable industry in the world. We just talked about ExxonMobil. All of the other oil companies in the last 10 years have had a profit of $947 billion, just under $1 trillion. Yet they continue to receive tax breaks in the order of $12 to $15 billion a year. For $4 a gallon for gasoline. You know, what's that all about? Well, it's all about the ability of the oil industry to maintain a subsidy, a tax break out of the American taxpayers' pocket, hand it over to the oil company. They've had that subsidy for nearly a century. I'm saying enough of that. Bring that money back into the Treasury. Use it for green energy, solar, wind, renewable energy, for research. Use it for the things that we need to do, including reducing the deficit. But oh no, they don't want to do that. Our Republican colleagues want to continue to give to the oil industry the kind of tax breaks that they have. And if that's not enough, our Republican colleagues want to make sure that this fellow, Donald Trump, he wants to be president, probably to maintain the extraordinary tax break that he presently has. The Republicans want to reduce the taxes for Donald Trump and for other billionaires, millionaires, from 35% to 25%. You go, why should we do that? At a time when we're taking money away from seniors, at a time when we're forcing the middle class to pay more, at a time when you're shifting the cost of all of these services to the middle class, at a time when you're going after the unions and trying to destroy the union movement in America, why in the world would you give Donald Trump? Why would you give billionaires? Why would you give those people at the very tip-top of the American economy, those people that now control over 25% of all of the wealth in America, the top 1% of wage earners in America, why would you give them a 10%, not a 10%, it's about a 17% reduction in their taxes? Makes no sense at all. We talk about shared sacrifice. The Republican budget proposal that will be on this floor later this week will not be shared sacrifice. It is, in fact, giving to the top of the American heap of all taxpayers, of all wealth, even more. I suppose it must be the trickle-down theory that if these folks, if Donald Trump and the other billionaires and millionaires have more money, somehow jobs will be created. The fact is, it doesn't work. Don't believe me? Take a look at the American economy 2001 to 2009, the George W. Bush period. George W. Bush started the very first year of his presidency with massive tax cuts that created a $2+ trillion deficit and very few jobs. During the Clinton period, ended with a $5.3 trillion surplus and the creation of over 22 million jobs. And the tax rate for Mr. Trump and for others, millionaires and billionaires, was 39%. It is, in fact, the history of America's economy that proves that you're not going to create more jobs by reducing the taxes for Mr. Trump and the like. So, what do these things have in common? A unicorn, Bugs Bunny, and the corporate tax rate of 35%? They're all fictional, every one of them. I want to now move to another subject, and I'll make this my last, and I'll make it kind of quick. If we're going to grow the American economy, we have to make the critical investments that are the foundation of economic growth in any and every country. Whether you are Singapore, whether you are China, or any of the European countries, France or Britain, the United Kingdom, or the United States, there are fundamental investments that the society has to make. And many of these investments are made through the general public's government. And let me just turn to those investments. This is part of our Make It in America agenda, the Democratic agenda of rebuilding the great American manufacturing base. If America is going to make it, we must make it in America. We have to rebuild the manufacturing base of America, and we can do it. We can do it, but it's going to take critical investments. And I want to just point them out here as we go through this and then compare these to the Republican proposal, the budget proposal that we're going to be voting on. The first one is trade. Now, the Republican proposal doesn't deal with trade and goods because they're not going to do any more harm to it. But this is fair trade policy. This is a policy of trade where we do not give away our manufacturing industry to places like China. I am sick and tired of going into Target or any other store in America and find made in China, made in Europe, made everywhere but in America. Enough of that. We need to see made in America once again on the store shelves of America. And when in California, the California government, not my responsibility, I wasn't responsible for it at the time, when they go out and they build a new bridge from Oakland to San Francisco, a multi-billion-dollar bridge, and they buy steel from China because it's 10% cheaper, I'm going, stop it. Stop it. And so today in the Resources Committee, I introduced an amendment. Now it's drill, baby, drill. It's our Republican colleagues who want to drill everywhere and anywhere and all the time. I think it's the wrong thing to do. We need to move to renewables. But if we're going to drill, then why don't we drill with American-made equipment? Why don't we require that those drilling rigs, those pipes, those technologies, the drill bits, the blowout preventers be made in America? I introduced that amendment. The Republicans brushed it aside, saying they didn't want to go that way. Okay, fine. But we need, on trade policy, to make sure that our trade policy does not disadvantage American manufacturers. Taxes? I just talked about taxes. Why in the world would the Republicans vote against a tax policy that actually is now law? We passed this last December. Why would they vote against a tax policy that would reduce, nearly eliminate, the tax breaks that American corporations get when they send jobs offshore? Why would you vote against that tax breaks that American corporations have? I don't understand it. It's over, at least partially over. There's more that needs to be done, and my Democratic colleagues and I are asking our Republican colleagues to work with us to eliminate the rest of those tax breaks that American corporations get when they send jobs overseas. We talked about some other issues here. For example, last December, the Democrats pushed through, Obama signed a bill that allowed American corporations and businesses to write off 100%, year one, this year, 100% of capital investments, so that we encourage American manufacturers to invest in America so that they can be more productive. Energy policy, extremely important. We cannot any longer put our economy and our national security at risk to foreign oil producers. So I guess part of the drill, baby, drill is to try to deal with that. But that's not going to solve the problem. We need additional and new energy sources, and that's where the green energy, the future energy, comes in. Don't take it from me. Talk to our American military. Talk to the Navy, Air Force, Army. They know and they think way ahead, and they know that they cannot depend upon oil. They need to move to other sources of energy. They did it years ago. They had wind on their ships. Then they went to coal. Then they went to oil, and then they are now using nuclear power. But they also know that many of their pieces of equipment, a jet airplane isn't going to have a nuclear reactor. So they want to free themselves from the grip of the petro dictators around the world, and they want to be able to have energy made here in America. And this is biofuels, advanced biofuels of all kinds. We ought to follow the lead of our military here, and we must create energy projects that provide us with clean, renewable energy, whether it's nuclear or the green energy, solar, wind, biofuels, and geothermal, all the rest. So energy policy becomes extremely important. Labor. It turns out, if one were to look at American economic history, you would be able to track the rise of labor in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, tracking perfectly with the rise of the middle class in America. So as labor became more predominant in America, we saw the American middle class grow right along with the labor movement. Beginning in the 1970s, we saw the decline of the labor movement. And if you track the decline of the labor movement, you will find the decline of the American middle class tracking perfectly with the decline of the labor movement. And now we find all across the Midwest, in Wisconsin and Ohio, a major movement to take yet another shot at labor, to weaken labor or to destroy labor. In the process, you will find the further decline of the middle class of America should they succeed at that. But this is more than just the labor movement. This is the preparing the American worker to be competitive in a modern economy. This is education. This is job training. These are programs to retrain and to bring into the workplace workers who are prepared to deal with the modern machinery and the modern equipment that a well-placed and well-executed economy must have. I want to move to the next one, which is, in fact, education. Earlier today, I met with the president of California State University, East Bay, part of my district in California. And the president, Muhammad Kwame, who happens to be an Afghan, was talking about programs that they're putting in place in the East Bay of California, San Francisco Bay, to encourage the education of children. Modern technology, using iPhones, using techniques in computer technology so that the kids who are into these things in a big way will be able to learn. Not going out and buying expensive textbooks every year that are out of date the next year, but rather to use online publications and be able to bring to the student all of the world. I was going home last weekend and I got a call from my wife. She said, "Can you find a light bulb for the projector? It's out. We need a light bulb for the projector." And I said, I just got off the airplane. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got online. I punched up my Safari, and I looked for light bulbs. In a matter of moments, I found, not too far from the airport, a photo shop that had the light bulb. The whole world is here. The whole world is available for a student who's just curious. You cannot help but be curious. All you need to do is get online, and you can find out everything about the world around us, anything you're into with science. And it turns out that this little piece of equipment, according to President Kwame, is also a tool for the teacher. The test can be taken on this. And in taking that test, the teacher immediately knows what the student does not know. And so the next day in class, that could be dealt with. I think I'm running out of time here, and I'm going to finish very, very quickly with intellectual property. This is the transition of all of the research into the manufacturing sector. Make it in America. We have to do this. We can do this if we have the right policies in place. And so with that, I am out of time.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Under the